What's up everyone, Brother Darcblade here with a patch information video for Space Marine 2. This is regarding patch 3.0, which was released for all systems on the 26th of September 2024. It's quite a hefty patch. It was around 14 to 16 gigabytes on the PlayStation at least, so it's going to take a while to download. Nonetheless, this patch is well worth it as it adds new features and a bunch of balance changes. And in keeping with the developers' gaming philosophy, the changes and tweaks are primarily buffs rather than nerfs. Well, when I say buffs, they're buffs to the Astartes and nerfs to the Xenos and Heretics. So the enemies, the Tyranids, Chaos Space Marines, they have seen quite a few nerfs which benefit us, obviously not them. But this should all make our purging even better. Now in this little video I'll be going over the patch information, especially the highlights of the patch information. Now first of all, the devs give us a little message. Greetings Marines, the newest patch for Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 is now live, packed with new features, and yes, it brings ultra-wide support. And yes, it adds private lobbies in operations mode. But that's not all. There's a new sparring arena in the Battle Barge, available whilst in operations or Eternal War modes. This brand new area is accessible directly from the launch bay, and once there, you'll be given your weapons and grenades as if you were in a PvP match and allowed to spar it out with your battle brothers ahead of your next mission. We've also introduced the option to reset custom armor and color palettes by replacing them with default ones instantly. You can find the complete list of improvements and changes below. The devs continue to thank us and appreciate any feedback or ideas we have for the game going forward, and of course, they bless us with Emperor Protects. So it may not seem like much, but this patch actually has quite a bit going for it. So first of all, in regards to new features, as mentioned, the hub sparring arena has been added to the game. A new special arena on the Battle Barge, available in operations, the PvE co-op mode, and Eternal War game modes, which is the PvP mode, where players can compete against one another in friendly PvP modes. So if you wanted to test out your skill against your teammates, you could use this as an opportunity. This is also a good way to maybe kill some time if you're waiting for a player who's gone to have some dinner or something. Next up, they've added ultra-wide support for PC players. This is only for PC players, not console players. So this is good for players who like to play in that ultra-wide setting. They've also added private mode for operations mode. That gives players the ability to play alone with bots or alongside one friend and another bot without being match made with random players during the mission. This is one of the changes that I've been longing for, to be honest. I am a little bit antisocial, or I can only play with one friend at a time. So having the ability to play with bots or one bot is actually quite nice. No offense to random players, but sometimes you can get the best player in the world or the person who unfortunately drags the entire team down. I guess that's why they're called random players. But nonetheless, when it comes to bots, you have a certain degree of reliability, shall we say. Bots aren't fantastic, especially when it comes to dealing damage to opponents, but they are good when it comes to survival and resurrecting. They normally are they're quite durable, put it that way. Especially if the bot is a heavy or a tactical marine or a bulwark. So I do like this option a lot, especially when I am in my antisocial mode or I'm playing with just a single friend. Anyway, next up they've added a what's new and message of the day information section when you're moving around the Battle Barge. That gives us tips, as well as it will probably give us updates when it comes to patches and DLC and so on and so forth. And finally, they've added the option to reset custom color palettes, which you can see in the GIF here. It was a little bit confusing at first how to do it, but with a little bit of practice, it becomes second nature. Now moving on to the gameplay and balance tweaks, which is something I get really excited about when it comes to patch videos, because I love to see what they've changed and what they've adjusted. And it's exciting because the devs seem to definitely be taking the approach of buffing things is definitely better than nerfing things. I'm sure the Tyranids and Chaos Space Marines would disagree, which we'll get into in a moment. Now first of all, the marking tool has been updated. They've improved the responsiveness of it, as well as the comfort of the social wheel control with a mouse. They've disabled unnecessary objects that do not require highlighting and worked poorly with it, as well as several minor bug fixes with the marking as well. So ultimately, marking has been made a lot easier and responsive. I personally, even when I'm playing with friends on voice chat, I mark everything because highlighting high priority targets in red or pointing out various objects to my allies is great. Even if we are communicating with one another, that extra level of communication via the marking tool is definitely a boon when on missions. Anyway, next up, the Power Fist. The damage for fully charged attacks have been greatly increased. They haven't specified how much this is by, they just said it's greatly increased. So, players who use the Power Fist, the Mr. Fisters out there, are definitely going to be happy with this one. Next up, the Heavy Plasma. This is just the Heavy Plasma, the Heavy Marines weapon, not the Plasma Incinerator or the Plasma Pistol. The base ammo has been increased by 5, the blast damage radius increased, overheating per shot drastically decreased from 50 to 30 for charged shots and from 20 to 15 for base shots, and the base damage as well has slightly increased by 10%. So nice buffs to the Heavy Plasma, hopefully bringing it in line alongside the Heavy Bolter and the Multi-Melter. Next up are the Med Stims, or the Medicare Stims as I tend to joke about, which basically restore contested health now in addition to the actual health it heals. So when you have a large portion of white health on your health bar, you can use the Medistim to restore all of that as well as additional health it would restore. This is great for if you know that you are not in a position where you can contest that health and get that white health back by attacking enemies, making Medstims even more useful. Next up is the Auxiliary Grenade Launcher ammo that can now be refilled only from ammo boxes and not from the infinite ammo cache. So this could be seen as a little bit of a nerf to players who like to use the bolt gun that has the grenade launcher strapped to it. But anyway, let's move on to the campaign. There's a few changes here. First of all, in regards to difficulty. But anyway, let's move on to the next section where we talk about the campaign. First of all, difficulty. Enemy aggressiveness on veteran difficulty in the campaign has decreased for better single player experiences, and players' health on veteran difficulty in the campaign is slightly reduced to compensate for the AI aggressiveness and armor management updates. So basically, veteran difficulty has been nerfed, making it easier for players, which is a little bit of a... I wouldn't say shame per se, because we still have Angel of Death difficulty, but I would like to say that anyone, myself included, who completed veteran difficulty before this patch gets certain bragging rights, shall we say. Speaking of which, if you want to see my playthrough, I'll leave a link down in the description below or in the pinned comment if you want to check it out. It's a fun little playthrough. Well, little is a fun playthrough, so definitely go check it out if you're interested. Now, moving on to the bots in campaign. Basically, this refers to Gadriel and Chiron. Various inhibiting restrictions were lifted, allowing the bots to be more helpful and effective, while still not beating the game for players. So maybe once a player is down, they'll tone it back a bit in regards to how much damage they do. We'll have to wait and see. This should be interesting, and it should be good for players who really want to go through the campaign on their own in single player. Next up, the bots will now help focus firing zoanthropes when the player attacks them. This is good, as before they would just stand around and look like they're not doing much. It was a shame. I always thought that it would be nice that if the marking system, if you marked a zoanthrope or a high priority target, that the bots would actually focus on that target as well. But helping the player, if the player is already firing on the zoanthropes, is a nice addition. Next up, they've heavily eased the restriction on bots finishing off enemies instead of leaving them for the player to do so. This is to reduce annoyance. In the past, I've seen this before. Basically, you would have multiple Tyranid warriors ready to be finished off. They're all stunned around you, but you don't have enough time to do them all yourself, and the bots would just leave them, to which they would become unstunned and start attacking again. Now the bots should finish them off. Also, the bots are now allowed to help with the gargoyle objectives on one of the early missions in the game. The gargoyles would be attacking pylons. You would have to shoot the gargoyles off of the pylons. Unless you were playing with actual human players, it was annoying to do. Now the bots should help you making that mission a little bit easier. They also fixed a variety of bugs related to bots getting stuck, and they fixed a bug where the bots could run out of ammo or weapons without a magazine. But moving on to Operations mode, my favourite mode in the game. Well, it's on par with the campaign, but I've spent the most amount of time in operations mode, as I love the fact that you can have so many builds, not only in terms of what your starties can do, but also the weapons. Weapon has its own tree, so there's lots of variety there, and that's what keeps me going. I wish there was a few more missions, but we are getting them in the future. But anyway, first of all, they tweaked the AI director. The AI director, for those of you who don't know, if you've played Left 4 Dead, it's basically a behind-the-scenes director who controls the Tyranids and Chaos Space Marines to give players the best experience they can. As in, if, for example, players are struggling, future waves may be a little bit easier, but if the players are doing really well, then the director will make things a little bit more challenging. Anyway, they've tweaked the AI director and spawn rules of Chaos enemies in operation mode. The maximum number of Zangors with shields on the arena at the same time has been reduced from 10 to 4. The max number of cultist snipers on the arena has been reduced from 10 to 3. The max number of Zangors on the arena at the same time has been reduced from 30 to 20. The max number of Rubric Marines with bolt guns in the arena has been reduced from 8 to 5, and the max number of Rubric Marines with Warp Flamers on the arena at the same time has been reduced from 4 to 3. So basically, the amount of Chaos enemies we are going to be fighting in any one areas, I know they refer to them as arenas, but it's basically arenas, areas, same thing. Ultimately, this means that we are going to fight less Chaos forces. For me personally, the reduced Chaos snipers and the reduced Zangors with shields are very much welcome. The others I wasn't too worried about, I thought they were okay, but this is going to make a better experience when facing the forces of Chaos. Anyway, next up, the Perfect Parry, or Parry, has been updated. It now restores armor for killing minor enemies, not only for countering their special attacks, which are indicated with the blue circle. This is adding a lot to our survivability, as we can parry Termagants, Hormagaunts, Zangors, and get our armor back from them. This is also why they mentioned in the campaign section that they've reduced our health, because it is a lot easier for us to get our armor back thanks to this change. Next up, regarding block and fencing weapons, a bug has been fixed in the Perfect Parry window for fencing weapons. Now it has 20 frames window for Perfect Parry and 10 frames of vulnerability at the end of the animation, instead of 30 frames of Perfect Parry for the full animation as it was intended originally. So this could potentially, if I'm reading this correctly, could be seen as a little bit of a nerf to the fencing weapons. Could be reading it or misunderstanding it incorrectly, but it looks like the fencing weapons may have received a little bit of a nerf there. But that being said, fencing weapons were really strong when it came to countering opponents. This may be a result in regards to the chains for getting armor back from minor enemies, but who knows. Anyway, next up, the assault class. The base ground pound damage has increased by 30%. I love the assault class, but I was maybe underperforming a little bit, especially in the harder difficulties in operation mode. Talked about here. PvP is a different story. So basically, they've increased the damage of the ground pounds. I still think the assault marines are viable on all difficulties, but they maybe need a slight change in mentality when you're using the assault classes on the absolute hardest difficulties. Instead of running headlong into enemies, maybe hold back and use or approach encounters in a little bit more of a defensive style. And then finally, with operations mode, armor boosts drop from destructible crates less frequently now. The cooldown has raised from 30 seconds to 60 seconds, so you shouldn't see them popping up as often as we used to. Now, moving on to PvP mode, which is a mode I don't play often, but I do dabble in it from time to time. First of all, they've improved the player spawn system, so it should make spawn killing a lot more difficult. And they've reworked the Vanguard's grapple launcher in PvP. Instead of a full stun, it will now stagger opponents and slow them down drastically. So a little bit of a nerf to the Vanguard there. Now, an interesting section here is the changes to the AI. Which, well, let's get into this. This is basically, I hate to say it, it's mostly nerfs to the Tyranids and the Chaos Space Marines, except for the last two, which we'll get into in a moment. First of all, they reduced the ability to stun lock enemies with ranged attacks across all AI characters. Now, this could be considered a nerf to a degree. to players, a buff to the Tyranids and the Chaos Space Marines. This is potentially referring to certain weapons like the melter gun or the multi-melter that was able to stun lock opponents, preventing them from moving. This shouldn't be the case anymore. Next up, the accuracy of ranged enemies has been reduced when attacking from off-screen, and the accuracy of ranged enemies is also reduced when attacking melee engaged players. So no longer should we be getting sniped when we're in melee combat with opponents or when we can't see where the ranged attacks are coming from. Also, regarding the Hormagaunts and Zangors, the melee damage is now a specific amount of damage, instead of removing one complete armor pip or segment per attack. This is going to make things so much more, well, it's going to make things better, put it that way. Next, with the Zoanthrope, the Psychic Tyranid, basically a lot of changes to the Psychic Scream. They've increased the Psychic Scream's damage sparsing time from 0.5 seconds to 2 seconds to prevent one-shot damage. The Psychic Scream's damage has overall been reduced from 11 to 8. The Psychic Scream's effective range has been reduced from 50 to 40 meters, and the Psychic Scream's cast range has also been reduced by 10 meters. Next up with the Termagants, 2 changes here. First of all, the Flesh Borer's spray attack damage has been reduced from 1 to 0.5, and the Flash Borer spray attack damage has been reduced from 0.3 to 0.1. Next up for Tyranid Warriors with Devourers, the projectile damage has been reduced from 0.9 to 0.6 per projectile. So as you can see with the Zoanthropes, Termagants and Tyranid Warriors with Devourers changes, they've basically reduced the damage output of the faction's ranged attacks, which should make for a better experience. But moving on to Chaos, the Rubric Marine with Warp Flamers, they've all been nerfed basically. The icon of flame damage has been reduced from 9 to 6, the Flamer burst damage reduced from 6 to 4 per shot, the Flamer shooting damage reduced from 6 to 4 per projectile, and the Marine's health has been reduced by 10%. So it should make them less, well, tanky and tough, I guess. We'll see. We'll see how this all pans out, to be honest. At the moment, though, I'm still not even through the entire patch notes here, and so far it's been... I'm excited about this patch. Anyway, next up are the Rubric Marines with the bolt gun. The spray attack damage has been reduced from 1.5 to 1. The precise shot attack, which is the red indicator attack, the damage has been reduced. From 4 to 2 per projectile. They've also reduced the frequency of teleports used to disengage players to make them less annoying to fight. This is something that I used to. This was aggravating when facing the bolt gun wielding Rubric Marines, as you would charge into them, especially when you were playing a melee Astartes, and they would just end up running away. It was frustrating. Finally, they've also reduced the health of the Rubric Marines with bolt guns by 10% as well. Next up, the Zangors with shields, which are really frustrating in my opinion. They have greatly reduced their HP, but they haven't specified how much by. But nonetheless, that should make things great for us. It's really hard when... Because to the Chaos Space Marines and the Tyranids, it's nerfs to them, but it's kind of buffs to them, buffs to us, I mean, sorry. So it's hard to kind of describe if I should be calling it a buff or a nerf, so I'm just going to keep on calling it nerfs to them. Buffs for us, I guess. But now 2 changes that are going to add a little bit more of a challenge. First of all, the Carnifex. The Rage phase has been updated. Carnifex has become faster and more aggressive. They've also reduced the taunt frequency, and they fixed a bug where the Cone of Thorns attack wouldn't fire projectiles. So the Carnifex has been smoothened out, and the experience against the monster should be a little bit tougher. And next up is the Hive Tyrant, which has had its health slightly increased, and its resistance to explosive and melter weapons also increased by 20%. This should make the Hive Tyrant a lot more of a spectacle to fight, hopefully, because even on the toughest difficulties, there were tactics players could use to bring down the Hive Tyrant incredibly quickly. The Tactical Marine with the Auspex scan spec'd in the right way, as well as a melter gun combined with a heavy with a multi-melter, so on and so forth. It could bring down the Hive Tyrant really. Hopefully this makes things a little bit more of a challenge, but not too much of a challenge that it's frustrating. Now next up, I'm only going to touch on this a little bit. When it comes to customizations, they've smoothed the experience out here. They've fixed the icon color for various shades, as well as default colors for certain chapters. They've also made a few changes to some of the patterns when it comes to armor coloring, as well as the cost of certain pieces of armor when it comes to the Vanguard. Next up are a few changes to the maps. They fixed several issues that were preventing players from progressing within some levels, as well as collision issues. They've also tweaked the dust storm density and duration during the ballistic engine operation. They've also fixed the Hell Drake fire timing on the bridge in the reliquary operation, and the trials can now be accessed via the Hypnomat in the armory. And finally, there are a bunch of general fixes. There are 3 that stand out here. For example, they fixed a bug where changing your loadout mid-operation would restore your health. I was told this was intentional for classes that had health increasing perks such as the Bulwark or the Heavy Space Marine. They also improved the jump pack abilities responsiveness, so it should make it easier to use, or at least feel more responsive. And the other thing that stands out to me is that there are certain UI improvements. For example, when a huge enemy wave is coming, you'll get a new audio indicator that the wave is on its way, so you can prepare for it. There's also changes with the icons to the certain enemy types, so if you're fighting an extremist, you'll have a specific icon for it. As always though, I'll leave a link down in the description below where you can check out all the patch notes for yourself, because overall this patch is fantastic. I am thrilled with the changes that they've made, to be honest. Making the campaign mode on Veteran a little bit easier is definitely welcome, because it was a challenge. The jump up in difficulty from normal to Veteran was quite a lot, and folks who are upset that Veteran has been kind of nerfed or changed, you still have Angel of Death mode, which I still need to go back and play. As for the actual buffs to the Astartes, they are great. The nerfs we received, like for example melter weapons getting a bit of a nerf, is kind of needed. They were kind of OP, to be honest, but to be honest, the Tyranids and the Chaos Space Marines have all received nerfs, which shouldn't sort of like highlight the nerf to these melter guns overall. I think the nerfs and changes to the Tyranids and the Chaos Space Marines overall will make operations mode and the campaign feel... it should make it feel better. Me personally, one of the biggest changes is the change with the parry system, where you can now parry the little tiny enemies and get armor back from them. So that should make the quality of life of this game and the feel of combat even better. But like I said, I'll leave a link down in the description below if you want to go to check out the full patch notes for yourself. And what are your thoughts? Is this a good patch? Are you excited? Are you happy with what they've changed? Please leave a comment down below. And until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a patch information video for patch 3.0 in Space Marine 2. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like for more.